The COVID-19 pandemic has made it even more apparent, both to policymakers and I think to the public at large, how critical it is that we focus on our early education and care sector, and that we need both major reforms as well as a new investment in early education and care.
We're actually at a point where we need to think beyond regaining ground and think about the reinvention of all of this. Now, we needed to think about the reinvention before the pandemic, but that all of this has been exposed and that the conversation is more public facing and common parlance for folks who aren't even close to the operations of early childhood development. We need to have more conversations about the thing that we need to invent that is just and sustainable. If all that we do is try to rebuild what we had, we know what challenges await us.
We believe that the crisis had to be seen and felt, and we have now seen much more momentum thinking about policies to solve the persistent challenges that we have faced over the last few decades. We cannot forget that. We also cannot go back to the way things were. When we think about Massachusetts, we often think of a state that's leading in education indicators. And while this is true, we have been making slow and steady progress. We right now don't have a statewide pre-K program. We have been working toward many of those goals for years, and I would say in the last 2 years, all that we have learned from the pandemic, we can apply these lessons to reimagining what it might look like in the future.
Not everybody at first thinks that investing in childcare is an obvious investment to make. So we bring them the numbers. We bring them the numbers of women who have lost their jobs disproportionately in this pandemic because they can no longer find childcare they need. And that includes essential workers like our nurses. I recently heard from one of the CEOs of a leading healthcare system in Massachusetts that a lot of his nursing shortage is due to a lack of childcare. These are issues that wherever you stand on the political ideology, you can understand. And I've also relied on the business community to come and help make the case with me. Let's show that if we want to have these jobs filled, we have to invest in childcare as part of that.
For us as an employer, it's important that we work to help provide a better structure of support for our employees, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's a smart thing to do. As a community partner, we leaned into this because we began to recognize how important this issue was to driving greater economic inclusion and mobility here in the Commonwealth. In many ways, we're the greatest beneficiary of a stronger early child care system because it develops a stronger workforce, not only the workforce of today, but the workforce of the future.
Most legislators would want to know is, how does this help my district? How does this help my constituents? And I think there are several arguments here that show how this is an issue that positively impacts, I would argue, every district, every constituent, because we all have a vested interest in having a well-educated population. Massachusetts, the economy here is dependent on a well-educated workforce.
Certainly not unlike so many states across the country at this very moment in time, rebuilding and even reimagining early education and care is no longer simply a societal priority or even a value, but it is rather an economic strategy. Stabilizing, rebuilding, reimagining childcare is going to be the way out of the pandemic, but also an overdue opportunity to give it the role that it essentially plays every day as a public good in the state and across the country.
When the state is considering either implementing or changing a policy, whether that is initiated by the legislature or by the executive branch, there's nothing more important in my mind to getting input from the stakeholders. I think it's important in the early education sector to bring community leaders into the conversation because there are ways in which communities can support the early education sector. The expansion that we are hoping to see of high quality early education for everyone has to be a joint venture among a variety of entities. And in that, I would say state, local, and federal all have to be in partnership for this to work.
I have to be like a general practitioner, where I need to know a little bit about everything as a doctor, then surround myself with good, knowledgeable people, or people that will tell me the pros and cons of the issue. I want the experts to tell me, here's the issue we have, how can we deal with this issue so we can have positive outcomes. And if that's it, then we find the money a way to do it.
If we're waiting for there to be definitive research on the brain science, on what the right start in life means, that ship sailed. We get it. We should get it. I think that there is a new generation of questions that have to do with how we fulfill our equity desires, with how we get to a place where early childhood is a public good prior to it being fully publicly funded.
In a very disheartening time of partisan divide in Congress, I do believe that childcare and universal pre-K are issues that we can find partners across the aisle. I think that people are hearing the same thing I'm hearing. Whether you live in rural, suburban, or urban America, in a red state or a blue state, childcare is an issue for families at home. And as people want to get back to work, want to be able to provide for their families in a way that keeps them safe and secure, childcare is a barrier to that success for far too many families.
Early childhood education is crucial to building and fostering an equitable society. We think about it in terms of child developmental growth, where we can support children's socio-emotional and academic learning.
It is in fact well understood that these days that children living in poverty who might benefit the most from high quality early education have the least access to the programs.
We've got a whole lot of research about the gap closing effects of high quality care in education, unlike K-12, which I think at different stages of development is still wondering what is most potent in closing those skill gaps. So now our challenge is really universality. And so how do we actually build the system structure to even-handedly replicate quality and deliver it on a consistent basis?
The key is to, again, do this in a very collaborative way where we have community-based conversations and planning that figure out, well, what are the needs in that particular community? What types of families and children are not being well served? Okay, what's the best way to expand services and capacity to meet the needs of those children? I think an excellent example for how this is working quite well, actually, is in the city of Boston, where Boston's program for building to a universal program for 4-year-olds has been a partnership between Boston Public Schools as well as a whole variety of community-based providers in the city. I think that's the kind of collaboration that we can model after and expand statewide.
I think there's a role for all branches of government when it comes to supporting, early childcare within our communities. Certainly local leaders play a role because we're on the ground. We know the providers, we know the families, and so there's a role for us to play in both identifying the need, understanding the assessment, and working hard on those transitions from early care into, public schools. And I don't think any city can take this on alone. And I don't think the state or federal government can take it all alone. It's going to take that partnership effect of providers, of dollars, of support systems and training, and the technical assistance, particularly in communities that aren't very large. They're going to need that help in that scaffolding. I think one of the questions that has arisen as we've worked through our mixed model program and growing our high quality pre-K experience, both in our schools and in our community, is what's the right structure? It can't be distinct from our schools and it can't be distinct from our community, but a separate entity to really help us, make sure we've got a sustainable ecosystem for supporting early childcare at all levels, not just pre-K.
You can't come in and set all of these expectations without ensuring that there are families involved in making a decision around how this will be implemented with children and families. Shared governance includes making sure that our community partners are helping to inform the direction. So we can't say we're going to set all these standards without talking to providers around what do they need to actually meet those standards.
Early childhood and building a just system that facilitates the right start for every child and their family is an imperative. We have no choice but to do it. If we're concerned about future workforce, if we're concerned about the integrity of the democracy, if we're concerned about the strength of our communities, it begins at birth. We've got the tools. A lot of it now is that we simply need the will.
We know how much that investment costs. And the real question is, how can we afford not to do it?
We show how much we value the future of this country by how much we invest in children, and we really need to invest heavily in our children to ensure they're prepared for success. And that's going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of money, and it's going to take a lot of energy, but it's absolutely worth it for an equitable, for a brighter future for all of Massachusetts' youngest children.
You know, the major sources of funding for the early education and care system today, obviously, we depend heavily on families, both through the tuition they pay as well as parent fees that subsidized families pay. But we also depend heavily on federal funding and on state resources as well. You know, in order to make the kinds of systemic reforms that we need, we certainly can't ask families, you know, to pay more. The tuitions are already unaffordable for all but the wealthiest families, so that's certainly not a solution. We have to look to either the federal government to increase resources for early education care, state government, and or our employers. I mean, those are really the three places.
You know, we as a business community have to be very mindful that in addition to lending our voices, we have to lend our own resources. And that's a key focus of the coalition, is the development and sharing of best practices, things that each of us have done to demonstrate that investment in support of our own employees that we can all learn from and hopefully systematize across employers everywhere.
Educators are essential for children and families in the broader economy, and we can support them in many ways. They are also a group that is remarkably dedicated and resilient, and we saw this right through the pandemic. In our statewide work, in our statewide study, we heard time and time again about the ways in which they pivoted and moved mountains and mounted emergency childcare for essential workers.
I want to say to all the early educators out there that we see you and we appreciate you. We know that you are the most essential of essential workers to our families on good days. And these have not been good days. And we understand that there will not be success for our children and families and economy without your success. So please consider us partners in this work. We want you to succeed because we know that means kids will succeed. And we are so grateful for the work that you have done, that you do every day, the care for these children and the care for our communities. You make our economy work, and we are going to work for you.
I am mostly proud of the people who continuously has given themselves to the field of early education. It's one of the most important work that I feel like any of us could ever do. When I reimagine early childhood education, I'm envisioning teachers being empowered and feeling like I am a teacher and I teach future brains. I teach future professions and feel very proud and valued.
The work is already done. You know, you just need to connect with the people who have done that work and share in the responsibility of getting the task completed.
What would it look like if your community was the most family-friendly place in Massachusetts? We are going to need everyone to play a role in making that reality come true.